Everybody good? Okay, let's roll. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the December 11th Policy Committee meeting. I'd like to start off with our introductions. We always introduce everybody, but actually I'm noticing that there are some extra introductions to do tonight. For example, Rachel Marciano is our new student representative. She's transitioned over from Joanna Vine, so welcome, Rachel. Glad to have you here, and Mrs. McMenamin, Mrs. Calderoni, Mr. Madden, Mrs. Stern, Dr. Babson, and also on the left side of the table, I'd like to welcome to the table Dr. Stevenson, who is also transitioning into the committee for 2019, taking over for Dr. Bar Check. So welcome, Dr. Stevenson. Dr. Bar Check, will be sad to see you go, but you have done a wonderful job of getting this transition going. And for continuity, we still have Mr. Diazio. So some things change and some things are staying the same. But anyway, welcome everyone, and I'd like to toss it to Dr. Bar Check to kick off our administrative remarks.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. And again, just in the sake of time, in regards to our practices that we've been following, I'm just generally announcing that we are looking at Policy 003 functions, as this will be hopefully proceeding to a second read and adoption at this month's regular business meeting. And then we also have Policy 004 orientation program for new school board members, which is being recommended for a first read. So we've been talking about this for a while, but our commitment of moving all our district policies, ARs, and attachments to board docs. So we are presently in the transition, and it will occur as of tomorrow morning. So the website will be shut down to access policies, and there will be directions to redirect you to board docs. And the reason for that and the reason for the quick turnover is because we've been working to make final corrections to any of the outstanding policies and ARs, and we've done that on board docs, but not on the website. So that's why the website will shut down, so those are no longer visible. But there will be, as I said, there will be directions in there that you'll be able to gain access to all our policies, ARs, and attachments through the directions that are provided. As promised, 915, our booster clubs policy. Just to give an update on, in regards to the communication plan, we are in the state where we are sharing that with the booster club presidents and participants, the members of those booster clubs. And I had an opportunity to speak with Mr. Bechtel and Mr. Friel today, and those are moving forward. The groups are providing the bylaws and the budgets through the templates that were provided through the AR, and they are all coming in within compliance of following what needs to be implemented based on the policy in AR. And then Mr. Petiti is currently working on the FAQs that will be up on the website shortly. And just wanted to clean those up to make sure we are accurate and in alignment with the policy and the AR itself. And then at last month's policy regular business meeting, we did pass for a second read policy 718, service animals in schools, and the AR, and those are both up on the board docs at this time. And then I'm going to turn the mic over to share for Dr. Stevenson to share a little bit about the status of Policy 222, the use of tobacco and electronic smoking devices, and why we're transitioning to the, not having it on the agenda for today, but moving it forward for future discussions.
Good afternoon. It is an honor to have the opportunity to work with this committee again, and I look forward to doing the productive work, continue the productive work that you have been doing over the last few years. The reason why this policy was tabled was because what I wanted to do was to do several things. Number one, I know there was a letter that went out from the high school that needed some clarification, so we're meeting with the principal and the assistant principal, Mr. Bechtel and Ms. Latour, to review that and also get some additional feedback about their positions on it. But Mr. Bechtel has also been helpful with assisting me in getting contact with other high schools in Delaware County who have vaping policies. And what we've found is that there is no necessary consistency there. And what we're going to do is look at what are the best practices that all the average it for the schools in the area are using, then come back and have conversations with the middle school and high school, particularly because those are where vaping occurs at middle school and high school. And I think, not just a high school conversation, but to have it also at the middle school. And then once we do that, also review, because also from the state and the Pennsylvania School Board Association, I think, is coming down with some new language, possible new language that they're coming out. So we want to turn around quickly, but we also want to be deliberate to make sure this is something that, because we know that vaping is an epidemic that is impacting our children, so we want to make sure it's something that is that will address it correctly, but also fluid enough to make necessary changes. So hopefully we'll be able to come back next month with that.
Okay. That's it for your administrative remarks. Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. With that, let's move into public comment. Is there any public comment this evening? Good evening, Mrs. Sherry.
Good evening. Judy Sherry, Governor's Circle, Newtown Square. This was a guide for school board candidates. Fairly old, so I don't know if it's current, but in describing the responsibilities of school board members under setting policy, the central responsibility of a board, both in theory and in law, is to be the policy-forming body. The idea of local control of education means the policies governing the operation of schools are to be formed in response to local needs and desires. Policy means actions of the board that set written goals and objectives for the school. A process of systematic policy review contributes significantly to the smooth operations of a school district. So, according to this little pamphlet, which was put out by Pennsylvania School Boards Association, setting policy is really one of the central responsibilities of the board. So the question is, regarding the Policy Committee 2018 goals, is it typical of school board committees to have the administration, instead of school board members, responsible for every listed goal, which is really how the 2018 school board policy goals are displayed? Right under each goal, 1, 2, and 3, it focuses on the administration. So I'd like to know if that is indeed the intent of the board members here. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment this evening?
Thank you for waiting. Cindy Spurtle, 106 Valley Forge Terrace, Wayne. Good evening.
Good evening.
I have my papers all. The first question I have is concerning the questions that were given at the end of each month are answered by members of the administration. And in November, there were 5 questions asked, and I'll just quickly read. Do any board members review the public comment responses for accuracy? Do board members take any responsibility for responses to public comment? Do board members provide information or input to any public comment responses? If so, which ones? And when will board leadership announce when deferred public comment is to occur? And what is the board's responsibility regarding policy review? Those are the first 5 questions for the month of November in the policy committee public comment, and there are no answers. My understanding is the answers are given by the administration. The question is, since we speak directly to the board, is the board going to answer these questions at some point in time? The next question I had was on the, also a question on the responsibility of the board. First question, was this included, was this posted online? Or is this something that's new to?
That was not. It's new. It goes along with the goals.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I didn't miss it. The policies are adopted and completed, and this chart shows how it then follows through to being taught, presented to the staff and to the teachers and students, et cetera. And I noticed that the policy/AR are posted at the same time that they distributed to the board members once the policy has been approved. The new form of policy in writing, a decision was made by the policy committee that the policy would just contain a few of the key points, and the AR, then all the other wording, how the policy is to be followed, will appear in the AR. The question is, does the board review the AR before it's decided upon and voted upon and posted? And if they do, and I noticed in reading the information that was presented, are there comments made? It says, yes, the board reviews them. Are there any comments that are then go back to the administration for possible changes to the AR? And then one other question quickly I had was on the presentation for the new board docs program that we're looking, the board docs additional services that are being considered this evening during committee to be presented for approval by the board, I believe. There's a policy review service and administrative regulation service options that are being considered. And my question is, and I noticed that the last full review for federal laws, regulations, et cetera, was last done in 2008. The monies that are being considered payable, will that replace an individual who's currently doing them? Is it going to be additional amount? In other words, is there someone that's currently doing, even if a full review has not been done since 2008? And the service option, is that something that's being done currently by a member of the staff? And will this take the place of that individual? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And it looks like we have more public comment for policy this evening. Good evening, Dr. Winters.
Good evening. I would just like to thank the policy committee for trying to keep everything up to date and in one place. And I know the computer has great resources, and these board docs are really wonderful. But I've found, as a person with my feet on the ground and sometimes looking at these policies, it was very helpful as a teacher and also as someone who's concerned about what's happening in the policy to actually have a printed copy of the policy manual. And I think it would be helpful if perhaps there was one at least in each building library so the teachers could quickly go and consult, because sometimes these fine computer accessibility issues sometimes don't make it as accessible as we'd like it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Winters. All right, from public comment, we're going to move into the approval of minutes. Committee, does anybody have any questions or concerns, comments about the minutes, or are they good to go?
Good to go. Good.
Good to go, Susan? Okay, terrific. So the minutes are approved. Let's move into agenda item number 1, policy 3, functions.
Policy 003, functions, is moving forward at this point. It was accepted for a first read at last month at the November regular business meeting, and there were no additional changes at this time.
Okay, so committee, at this point, we are hoping to move this to next week's business meeting for adoption. Is there any question, concern, comment about that, or are we ready to do that as a committee? Start over there, right side of the room, and work my way around. Mrs. McMenamin, roll call. Okay, Rachel, good. Susan, you good? Chuck?
Good. Yep.
Okay, so we would like to recommend that this be brought to the full board next week for adoption, second read and adoption. Thank you very much. Let's move to item 4.2, policy 004, orientation program for new board members.
Okay, so as you know, policy 004 was revised to include an update made in the June 2018 school code that requires newly elected board members to participate in a training. But we also, after further review, we revised the policy's purpose and was brought back at our December meeting. So this is coming back for a review, and then it would proceed for our first read at the December meeting, at the regular business meeting.
Yes, so as the committee members, I'm sure, saw, the purpose has been reworded to reflect the suggestions that were made at last month's policy
Correct.
meeting. So I'd like to go around and see if everybody is comfortable with that and ready to move this next week for a first read to the full board. Starting around with Mrs. McMenamin. Rachel, you're good? Susan, good? Andrew?
They're fine.
Chuck? Okay. I only had one suggestion for a word in the last part of the sentence in purpose, where it says newly elected or appointed board members shall also. I wanted to see if the committee would be okay with inserting the word also be provided with a district-specific orientation program, just to differentiate that there are two different things that are available to them.
Can I just clarify? That's in the guidelines, not the purpose, correct, you're saying?
Well, it's.
Yes.
Yes.
I can't tell because my guideline line is in between the two sentences.
Guidelines.
It's in guidelines?
Yeah.
The in addition is where the
Yeah.
guidelines begin? Okay, the alignment of this document's off. So yes, wherever it is, the point is that after the word shall, I wanted to know if anybody would object to inserting the word also.
No, I think that's good.
Okay, so may we,
That's not in the purpose?
based on the alignment, yeah, it
understand.
came
It's
out
on the
funky.
blue, on the red line, it's
think it's-
aligned correctly. On the clean one, it looked like it shifted, the formatting.
Oh, well, the whole.
Yeah.
This is that
you
old
have a whole
boilerplate
paragraph that-
template.
Okay, got you now.
Yeah, my bad, I was
got
looking.
you.
Yep.
That
mhm.
goes down.
So
Okay,
may we
that's good.
please insert the word also after the word shall in that guideline sentence?
Yes.
Okay, and then with that, we can move this to the board next week for its first read.
First read.
Okay, super, thank you very much. And let's move into then item 4.3, the 2018 Policy Goals Update / 2019 Goals Discussion. I don't think we're going to have much discussion about the 2019 goals tonight, but we just wanted to let you know that that will be forthcoming in January, I
Correct.
guess. So, Dr. Bar Check, will you please walk us through, and everybody should reference this updated document on that's in front of them. And you want to walk us through that, Dr. Bar Check?
Sure, I want to make sure. Can I borrow yours?
Excuse me,
'Cause I think mine was
Dr.
taken.
Barczyk, is this available on board docs?
I will make it
These-
available on
these
board.
two-
I'll put them both into board docs.
Thanks.
Following this meeting.
Thank you.
So you have them electronically.
Yep.
So goal number one was to work with our central administration departments to develop an effective, consistent, accountable approach for having policies and administrative regulations reviewed by staff responsible for implementation or compliance. So throughout the year, we have been collaborating administration with central administration departments, develop more routines of formal processes for newly revised and newly created policies. This newly established process ensures that all staff, those impacted by the policy itself, are notified and they're familiar with the policy and administrative regulations and any attachments that come into alignment with them, and that they maintain compliance with those documents. So thank you to Amy and Molly. We've had a team effort here in developing the flow chart that you see up on the screen in regards to when the policy is officially adopted. As we know, the AR is not an adopted document, but rather is in alignment with the policy and used to drive the administrative component of the policy itself. It then moves into final preparations for posting, and then it gets sent to the superintendent's office, which all postings, as we know now, will go on to board docs. And then there's a distribution, a dissemination of those documents. So they get sent to the central administrators and the respective departments. For example, if it's the EL policy that we did this year, that went to Dr. McQuiggan, as she oversees the EL department. She works with those teachers. They were provided those documents, and they reviewed them and were to work towards being compliant with those new laws. And then the communications department providing a customized dissemination plan if warranted, and that entails the booster club. So through the booster club policy, or the policy that was developed, we worked with Mr. Petiti to develop an actual communication plan from start to finish of how that information will be disseminated. And obviously, as you heard in the update tonight, Mr. Friel and Mr. Bechtold are working with the Booster Club presidents and members to make sure that they are aware of those documents and what's required. And then the policy and ARs are reviewed during our bi-monthly meetings at our educational council. So that's made up of all the administrators, educational administrators within the district where we meet. They're introduced to policies that have been adopted in ARs and reviewed with them to assure that proper compliance is put into place. And then down at the bottom, you do see the compliance officer, which currently is our HR department. They will, because the compliance officer can be anyone. So we made this very, I spoke with Mr. Stitzel, and we talked about making this as if anyone could be the compliance officer that the superintendent designates, but will provide a list of required policies and ARs to all the employees to review and compliance. So that will happen annually to ensure that we are going through that process. Any questions about goal number 1?
Sure.
So, I'm not quite sure what to do with this because I don't think we've ever seen it before. I don't think we've ever talked about it before. I'm not sure what you're looking for with this chart.
It was truly just to memorialize the process from when a policy is adopted, that we have some communication form that where it goes out to understand the different paths that it takes.
Got it.
Once
So-
it is adopted.
But who created this? Because some of it doesn't actually make sense to me, but if it's what makes sense to you and it's what you're actually doing, okay, but some of it doesn't make sense to me. So I was just, where did this come from?
I created this.
Okay. Ooh, okay, all right. Yeah, so, and the ed council, who's the ed council again?
The Ed Council is all the administrators who serve with educational decision-making. So that wouldn't include facilities or the business team. It would be all the principals, all the assistant principals, the teaching and learning department, Dr. McCook with the educational technology piece.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I think if it's, I don't know if this is helpful, Susan, but the interpretation of Goal 1, the reason why Goal 1 was established is because that dissemination process must have been, when the goals were established, something that felt it needed to be addressed. And so I think Dr. Bar Check worked this year to create and to really think about what the dissemination process was, and then to present it as this is, to achieve Goal 1, this is what the dissemination process, how it actually works for policy. So that was his answer to addressing goal number 1, which was established last year, I guess, because there was a need for that. Does that help at all to explain it? No?
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm just going to make the second comment now, just because I'm done.
Sure.
I can't reiterate enough, because it actually got said again in public comment. Board, and I think you'll address it in goal 2, and you mentioned it a minute ago, but the board does not vote on administrative regulations.
Correct.
That's all I want to say
Very
about
clean.
goal 2. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, and I was going to say Dr. Madden, elevate your status
Oh,
there, but
geez.
Mr. Madden,
Nice, yeah.
Mr. Madden, what?
Thank you. I guess my question, since we did have public comment about hard copy in the library,
Oh, that was a good idea.
right? As a old school kind of guy myself, I think it would be very, very beneficial to have something like that put in here, okay? There's, the policy book goes in, we have a spot in the library. The new policies that we pass, they get posted, actually physically, old school, they get put someplace where the people can read them. These are the policies that the board approved at the last policy meeting. They're up there for whatever, you name it. 2 weeks gives the opportunity for teachers to read it if they would like. Then after that, it gets removed, put in the book. And if anybody wants to see anything, they just go pull the book out. They're allowed to make copies. I think that's a way that we show teachers that, yeah, here's a policy book. As a teacher, I think would benefit our teachers to be able to see what we're doing, why we're changing things, how we're upgrading different things like that. And I just think it's something that would just show that we would like them to have the opportunity to read something when they can. Teachers are very busy. to expect them to go online and look this and look at that, because once they go online, they're going to be doing their lesson plans, they're going to be doing this, they're going to be doing that. They can cruise by library, they have a couple minutes at the end of the day, before the day, and they can look at this. So, Roberta, I'd like to thank you for that, and I'd like to see it memorialized and hear where it goes. I don't care where it goes, but it should be there. But I can't tell you to do that.
Before we go to Dr. Babson, because we're on the subject of teachers and we have a teacher representative on our committee, I don't want to put you on the spot, Mrs. McMenamin, but do you have any thoughts about the way it's illustrated here to reach teachers to some extent?
I just actually have one question, because it says that it's distributed, it's disseminated, and then it's reviewed. So reviewed throws me off, because I feel like
Just
it's been
tell
all of
Dr.
this.
Rabarczyk where exactly you have a concern about that. Which
last-
box?
The last circle, the policy AR review during the monthly meeting by the RTSD Exec Council. It's given out, it's approved, it's put together, it's given out, but then it's reviewed. So to me, that's confusing. Why are they, I get that they're gonna discuss it, they get it, so they can review it, but it almost seems like that's your final component, that it gets reviewed right there.
Maybe you
So
can
that's-
just explain what the, I don't know what the Educational
me off a little
Council
bit.
is either. So can we start maybe with what is the Educational Council?
Sure. Again, our educational council is made up of all the administrators within the district who have an educational decision-making. Principals, teaching and learning department, as I said, Dr. McCook, who has educational technology piece to it, Ms. Lesage with the special ed department, and then what happens, so all those individuals are brought together to be introduced to any policy and ARs that are adopted, so they're made well aware of them. And that's the reason for it, but I understand what you're saying. And can I just clarify real quick, and Patty, I'm not sure if it still happens. It was when I was at Wayne. There are the manuals in the principal's offices and the offices at the schools. I just don't know if they've been updated. So they used to be, though, Chuck. So that's something that we can look back into.
We-
Go back
we-
in time.
Yep.
School.
Well, hang on, we also, I believe, yeah, I believe we're actually required to have, so there's a policy manual upstairs in the front
Correct.
hall of the district office, and I
There is
believe we are
here.
required by law to have the policy manual available here in the district office, right? Policy 007, well, we'll
Seven.
look at it. Yep,
Yep.
okay.
So, but before we move on to Dr. Babson, I just want to make sure, because Mrs. McMenamin had a very specific question, it seemed like, about the wording in this circle on the right-hand side, and I just want to make sure that that's communicated to Dr. Rabarczyk in what you're intending.
I think the better word instead of reviewed is shared.
Can you just use the
communicated
microphone?
or shared.
Communicated or shared, because review makes it seem like you're at another final step after the final step already happened.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay, and I just want to circle back around to Chuck's comment. So as Patty indicated, Board Policy 007 says that with regard to distribution, that copies of this manual shall be given to the following, and one of them is building principals and assistant principals. Copies of this manual shall be numbered and a record maintained by the superintendent or designee as to the placement of each copy. Copies of revised pages shall be provided to the holders of manuals as changes are made. So it appears that we have a policy that already memorializes or, kind of spells out exactly Chuck's comment. So somewhere in this dissemination process needs to be built in the last step of that to make sure that when policies change, copies are given to the building principals and the assistant principals to be able to be put into their binders.
As per policy
As
007.
policy
So
7, yeah.
I'm looking at Dr. Stevenson, because I guess this is moving over, Susan, to Dr. Stevenson. And so I initially looked at Dr. Rabarczyk, but both Mrs. McMenamin, Mr. Madden, and Mrs. Stern's comments I'll be incorporated in the next iteration of this under Dr. Stevenson's watch. Is there anything else about the, Dr. Babson, do you have any comments about the dissemination process chart?
Actually, you touched upon something that, actually, a larger issue of the process of the flow of monitoring and evaluation. And again, I'm actually still getting a handle on the big picture myself. But just for clarification's sake, the process is that the board creates policies, but that there is a handoff to the administration, which creates ARs.
Correct.
And it's right there in the functions document that we talked about earlier.
Correct.
Policy 3, ARs do not require approval by the board. And so, at the same time, however, in this committee, we have talked about ARs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's helpful to think, to go back to this policy goals document here, that the administration can complete without documents needing to go through the formal policy revision process. So I think what I'm just kind of piecing it together here, that ARs are created by the administration, do not need approval by the board. And at the same time, however, ARs have come up in our policy meetings. And to me, my understanding, and again, this is just a sort of clarifying discussion here, but those AR discussions cover non-substantive changes. Would that be the correct language to use? And
yes, the
I'm
AR
also directing to Ed as well.
The ARs are informational. They're to align with the policies. Mm-hmm. And because our recent practices have been to keep the general information, the purpose of the policy within the policy itself, but move the more of the procedural components within the AR, mm-hmm. there's a reason why I think you still need to see both, even though you're not approving the administrative regulation. Mm-hmm. It's still for understanding of that informational component that it is still in alignment with what we're talking about in the policy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I just bring it up because I think it's helpful to sort of parse out mm-hmm. this division of labor and to be very clear about, the purview of the board versus the purview of the administration.
Yes.
Yeah, perhaps.
So, Dr. Babson, I heard you mention something about a question about non-substantive changes, and the way I heard it, you correlated those to something about the essence of ARs, and I could have misunderstood, but I want to make sure mm-hmm. that part is cleared up, because I didn't hear that in Dr. Bar Check's answer.
Okay.
So, do you want me to tell you what I heard, or you want to restate the question? Because that was, I think, different. That was not.
Okay.
So if I heard you correctly, you thought that the non-substantive changes to policies are reflected in ARs. Did you ask a question like that, or no?
So I guess I was making kind of a messy comparison, sorry, between discussion of non-substantive changes to policies and the process of overseeing or overlooking or discussing ARs, i.e. if we're looking over ARs, it's just that we're looking at non-substantive stuff. We're not looking to impose the board will on, the process of creating ARs.
I wouldn't call ARs non-substantive. It basically.
No, I'm not saying the ARs.
Sorry.
I'm not saying the ARs themselves
I know you aren't taking it.
I'm not saying that ARs themselves are non-substantive. Mm-hmm. I'm saying that our board discussion of them relates to non-substantive changes or edits. So grammar, punctuation, clarifying language, links to law, those kinds of things, right?
You mean when we are
talking about them here in this committee,
okay.
Right?
Well, I would say, I defer to our team over here, but I think when ARs are brought to us, it's because the policy themselves, which are just sort of broad frameworks, and the meat and potatoes is in the AR in terms of how this policy is actually going to play out in the district, that sometimes ARs, for example, like the Booster Club policy, mm-hmm. so much of the devil was in those details mm-hmm. that for us to have a more comprehensive understanding of where the district wanted to go mm-hmm. in setting up a policy around booster clubs. If we hadn't seen the AR, mm-hmm. the policy wouldn't have told us that much. So even though it's not our practice to approve ARs, if the administration presented the AR so that we'd really capture the essence of what the Booster Club policy was designed to do, because mm-hmm. everything it was designed to do is essentially in the AR. Mm-hmm. So that's why on those occasions when they're really big, meaty policies like that, mm-hmm. they share them with us. Mm-hmm. But good. Then we can, if we look at an AR, we're certainly able to give feedback to the administration and when we see it as a committee, right. But for the most part, we don't go through a formal adoption process with ARs the way that
Right.
we do with policies.
Okay, good.
Does that make sense?
Yes, so if I could
Okay.
just summarize very quickly, if ARs are brought up here in this committee, it's in the service of crafting board policy, which is within our purview.
Or understanding so policies are what we're going to do. ARs are how they're going to do it.
Yes?
And sometimes, to Amy's point, sometimes seeing the details of how they're going to do it support,
Helps our policy
it
making
illuminates our understanding of, we said you want it, we want you to do this with regard to policy. Administration says they're going to do it this way. Our kind of high level, to your point about non-substantive changes, where we're no longer going to spend a great deal of time at this level getting down in the details of non-substantive changes, which is what I think you were trying to say before. You know, we're going to stay at the level of, yep, you're presenting us with an AR, we understand it, and we're able to kind of draw the line between how they're doing it, the details of how they're doing it, is how they are supporting the policy that we've approved. That's really how they work in unison with one another, or in concert with one another, to my understanding, and Ed looks like he's going to chime in. Yes.
I think it's also important to kind of piggyback off of Mrs. Stern's point. Sometimes administration will bring an AR to the committee to get feedback, because a policy may be written very broadly, and administration will go back and they'll write an administrative regulation, but they'll want to know whether the board is comfortable with the interpretation of the policy. Ultimately, the superintendent or administration reports up to the superintendent reports to the board. So many times administrators want to know that when they develop a specific set of guidelines from a very broad statement of policy, that that's consistent with the board is looking for. Even though the board doesn't have to vote on the AR, sometimes that feedback, the discussion among the committee members, can provide input and feedback to the administrators to say, well, this is what we initially wrote, but we heard some differing points of view from our committee members. We're going to go back and we're going to revise this, because ultimately the best case scenario is that both the policy and the AR are written in a way that the board approves.
Right. Good, thank you.
Well said.
I think
Nice.
that, you know, just my last remark on this is that I hope this has been useful. I think having a clarification, even if it's just a discussion like this, a clarification of the division of labor, i.e., you know, for example, Ed, what you were just saying a minute ago, you were saying that by the request of the administration, if the administration brings it to the board, right? Again, that's about maintaining the purview and division of labor about who creates policies, who creates ARs, and that review process. So, anyway, Andrew, that word review kind of got me thinking too, and hopefully this is useful. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. It was a good discussion, Chuck.
Very good.
We're
I think
still
it-
focusing
yeah.
just on goal one.
We are, but I
Okay.
think historically, Andrew, we actually the board used to approve both policy and ARs. ARs were they were both together. And we really worked hard to remove the ARs so that when things had to change, the administration was able to do that. That would be the one thing. Now, the one question that I have, since we're talking about division of labor here, who determines if an AR is complete before it's posted? It says policy adopted. Now, we adopt the policy. AR completed. It's right here. Who's determining whether it's completed or not?
So it depends on the AR itself, but basically, you know, we will work with the other administrators within the district itself. So if I have Ed help me to craft something to make sure I'm covering all the boundaries of the policy, I'll use him as the legal side of it and to make sure I've caught all the components of what's the, you know, covers the purpose, the guidelines, responsibilities, and so. But then it'll be sent out to all administrators for review to give feedback prior to saying, okay, this is the done deal.
Right.
So that is when we come back.
So how does it come back to you? Does it come back from administrators emailing back?
Yes.
I mean, is this is a process which is great.
Yes.
I'm just curious.
But generally, yes, Chuck, it's through an email that coming back, here's the due date, give them feedback.
So does the superintendent have anything with this? Is he included in that
As part of
group?
the review of it, yes.
Okay. and then who's the one that determines it's complete?
It's generally a discussion with the superintendent to say, now, yes, he, you know, because generally he's the one that's overseeing it from the top and saying, okay, we're good with this.
Okay.
Or give suggestions to say, maybe this needs to be
Right.
revised in some
I'm
way.
just
but-
trying to, since we're the people, we're talking about policy now, we approve it, and then the
Right.
ARs put together, sometimes we have input, sometimes we don't.
Yep.
Administration discusses it. I just wanted to see whether it actually raises to the level of who's person responsible for the AR.
Yep. Just
We don't
like,
approve.
for example, I'll give an example real quick, just the Booster Club.
Mhm.
That went back and forth between Mr. Bechtel and Mr. Friel multiple times.
Right.
Because they're the ones that have the general knowledge, are going to be living with that. But in regards to Mr. Batchelor saying, okay, we're at a spot now, we can move forward.
Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.
Susan?
Nothing.
You
No,
sure?
it's not about this. It's
Okay, all right, so just we finished goal one was what it was, what we had for this year, and this is the administration's response to accomplishing goal one. Let's move then into goal two that we had for the year.
So goal 2 was the administration will continue to identify all policies and administrative regulations that have been previously discussed, not acted upon, and to ensure they are brought up to date and are completed. And, you know, I have to say, we are proud of the accomplishments within this goal. I'm not going to say it's every piece is completed, but as you can see, is for the example down below, the policies and administrative regulations that were brought forward that had been hanging out there, whether it's a policy without an AR or policies that had the wrong, the incorrect cross-reference or whatever it may be, those were brought up to date. And as you can see down the bottom, once we put 003, if that comes to fruition and we approve that for a second read, it's going to help in regards to the other, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 5 or 6 other policies that are listed down below there at the very bottom of goal number 2, the reflection, that we'll be able to make non-substantive changes to those policies without any delay, get those corrected and get those up onto, and correct them within board docs.
Okay, anybody want to make some comments about goal number 2 and the status of that at this point? Susan?
So my only request about this, and it caught my eye at the end of this, is that when you send the policies that have been revised to, when you, in whatever fashion you're going to inform the policy committee, if you could send a red line and a clean version, just so that we can see what the non-substantive.
Oh, the non-substantive, yes.
Changes have, were. I read and save all the red lines.
Yes.
That's what I read and save.
Yep.
So if you could make sure that that's what's sent to us,
Right.
I would really appreciate
Right, I don't think
that.
excuse is the process of what we do to follow in revisions. I think it's just more that we can do it without having to go to the first and second read.
Absolutely.
But I agree with you. I
Yep.
think you need to see that red line.
I need to see, it's just, we need to know what actually changed.
Correct.
Thank you.
Chuck, do you have anything?
No, I'm good.
Dr. Babson?
Good.
You're good? Okay, so 003, with any luck, will pass next week. And so it could very well be that January's policy committee could get some policy changes in red line version that show how those non-substantive changes have been addressed. They might or might not come through in January, but starting in January, as early as January, potentially, you'll see policy 003 go into effect, and duly noted that you'd like to see them in red line
Correct.
version to easily identify what those non-substantive changes were. Okay, goal number 3.
Then as we move into goal number 3, these are the policies, well, really the policies and the administrative regulations that go along with those policies that not in compliance with local, state, and federal mandates, including the current cycle review. We had 12 policies, along with their accompanying administrative regulations that were updated and revised due to changes in school code or law this year. And as you can see, the list is there, and they are all up to date on board docs as well. So.
Okay, does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns about goal number 3 and the status of that at this point? Okay, Chuck?
Nope.
Nobody? Okay. So, thank you. There's a lot of work that's been going on in the policy department this year, as evidenced by this status update. And I guess it's time to, it will be time when the committee reconvenes to look at what needs to be done for 2019. So thank you very much for that. And moving into our final agenda item of the night, we are going to be talking about what our PSBA has to offer in terms of policy services that we might want to avail ourselves of as a district in our efforts to work on policy. So will you walk us through that, please, Dr. Bar Check?
Sure. So, as you know, this is the PSBA policy services. And thank you to Patty. The policy conversion process is not even an option that needs to be placed on the table tonight because it's been completed internally. And then Molly and I actually had the opportunity to go through every policy within there, and we actually found 3 more, and we got them completed. They're up, they're posted, so there is literally no policy that is hanging off at this point and missing from board docs, like I said. So what the policy services would be that we would be looking for would be the merged employee policy service, which is taking the 300, 400, and 500 employee policies into one comprehensive employee section to eliminate the redundancy and enhance the efficiency of updating policies. And as we went through, we looked at these again, and there are a lot of duplicate policies, but there are some that are still going to need to stand on their own. So I'm not sure how that piece works with PSBA, and I didn't get to ask Dave Lynn, our representative from PSBA. I did talk to one other individual who had worked with this prior, and they said that basically what they did with the merged is if there was one that stood alone, they worked with their own boilerplate, as in the comprehensive review piece, to create a new policy for you. And then you had to tweak it to fit into your fit the district. So if it was one, so let's say 315, 415, and 515, for example, all were redundant of each other. They would go ahead and condense that. But if you had 475, which kind of stood on its own, they would go ahead and renumerate that policy into this condensation piece, but they would start over again. They would start with a boilerplate policy and then just fit in your school district's name, and then you would work with it as a school board to make it your own. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay, let me ask you a question that might.
Sorry, it's.
No, I'm just.
Hey, hang on. Let me ask you a question that might clear up a piece for me that has been kind of hanging out there. The policy numbers that exist in PSBA manual, are they dictated by school code or were they created by PSBA?
That's a good question. I don't know.
That's PSBA's numbering system.
Numerical system. Got it. Okay, so, Tony, in the merged employee policy service, which let me just start off by saying, I'm not actually in favor of doing any of these services personally, but the only one I would have considered is the merged one until you just said what you said, which brings up the following question. These get merged, and what do they become? The 200.5s? Because we already have policies that are the zeros, the ones, the twos, the threes, all the ways to the nines. So do these merged policies become the 1100s as merged? And let me finish. And then, so then back to for the policies that are not, that are standalones, do they stay back in the threes, the fours, the fives, wherever they're standing alone? For me, what I thought was going to be a value add of eliminating duplicative work or duplicative policies, essentially. What I thought, as you just said that, even this one particular service, I think creates challenges of its own because I don't know what the numbering system will be. I have thoughts on the other two services, but
Start with this.
That's my question. What do the numbers become in the merged service?
So when those are put together, the 300 section, which is administrative employees, the 400 section is professional, and the 500 section is classified, it becomes a 300 series, and it's simply titled employees. What you're getting and what your end product, though, remains is your standard PSBA boilerplate policy.
So the policies we've already changed and brought through the threes, the fours, and the fives, because we have a series of policies that we've made changes to, and if it were a 320, a 420, and a 520, we already made the changes to that. If they merge them, they go back to what was originally the PSBA policy?
That is my understanding as to what they do,
Okay.
because for this cost, there's no way that they're going to be able to look at every single district's specific
Right. Okay.
policies. An example of a policy that would stand on its own, one that comes to mind, for example, is overtime compensation.
Sure.
Generally, with respect to administrative employees,
don't have it in the threes or
overtime
fours.
compensation doesn't
Sure.
apply. There will still be a policy number 300-something titled overtime, and the policy will just not apply to administrators. The language will say that it applies to those who are entitled by law to overtime compensation. But you're correct,
what I was
Susan,
trying
the end product is the boilerplate language, and I'm not sure if you have a Radnor customized policy on sick leave, whether when PSBA performs their merge, I don't think that they're going to be taking the Radnor sick leave policies and putting them together. I think what they're going to present to you would be the PSBA recommended sick leave policy.
So when
Okay, thanks.
when I look at this, I wanted to follow up on Susan's point, if I may. When I looked at what we have in our table of contents for the 300, 400, and 500 policies, I would say, at just a random guess, 85 to 90% of the policies in those three sections are still in their original March 25th, 2008 format, which is when we received we purchased a whole the whole 2008 policy manual, essentially, from PSBA. So there aren't that many among these three sections that we have done any work on since 2008. So I just wanted to put that into the conversation for anybody who needed that information, because we are hoping that that out of this meeting, we can give the administration some direction as to which way we'd like to go. Do we want to engage with PSBA potentially for any of these services? If so, which ones? None. But I wanted to add that into the thought about the merging. Can somebody state what the benefit would be to merging these policies from a policy work perspective if we were to do this merge?
So the benefit is that elimination of redundancy of those policies that are the same for 300, 400, 500.
Well, that's what happens. That's what happens, is that you eliminate redundancy, but the benefit of eliminating redundancy in terms of workload is when you have to update a policy.
Updates and everything, right.
You only have to.
You're not updating three policies, you're updating one policy. So it's the efficiencies of reducing the number of policies that you have to go through when you're looking at any of those policies within the 3, 4, or 500s. So, like I said, and I know you just stated, Amy, there's a number of them that are still the 2008. And I just wanted to be clear, though, that like what Susan was asking, like policy 302, which is the one we did do about the superintendent.
Yep.
So that is one that will stand alone in the 300s. So that one obviously get condensed with anything, and they won't do anything with it. There won't be a boilerplate for that one, and it'll stand as it is. But all the other ones that they do condense, as Ed was mentioning, they do bring into the boilerplate, and what they do is they insert your name of your district.
And 302, since you brought that up, Tony, that one was changed in this year because of a change to school code.
Correct.
So we wouldn't be. Anything like that had happened, that had been updated, PSBA would have updated it too. So if they merge policies, we're not getting necessarily the original document. It would, by virtue of it having to have been updated, we could probably count on PSBA to give us the updated version, even if it wasn't exactly the way we updated it.
Right, I was just going to say, I would have to look at 302 of PSBA to see what commonalities stand among them to understand that.
Okay, so folks, anybody else want to weigh in about, or Susan, do you have more questions about that particular service?
I don't have questions, but, so if I'm understanding you correctly, I agree, in the 3, 4s, and 5s, we've not done that much work. But we have worked on 20 policies. In those three sections, we have done work on 20 policies, at least to my count.
Okay.
And so if we do this, I'm not in favor of it, because a vast majority of the policies have not needed our attention. So they haven't been costing us money or time because the vast majority of them we in fact have left alone for 10 years. And then if we do this merge, I just want to balance out the cost of the $16.50 to merge 3 sections that we haven't had to do much work on with what it's going to cost us to go then back in and redo the 20 policies in those 3 sections that we have made changes to, that for some reason or another, the boilerplate did not meet our needs. Now, maybe the boilerplate that didn't meet our needs has since been revised by either by law or by updates that we just thought were more appropriate. But there's a couple in here that catch my eye, as I think that they were particular to our school district, which then it gets, let me just say, the biggest reason I'm not particularly seeing value in this, and you can speak to this, Mr. Madden, I think, when the review was done in 2008, my understanding of the reason that it was done at that time is that policy as a committee had just not been doing, hadn't been particularly active and doing a whole lot of work, and they were kind of very far behind. And so the board that undertook the task in 2008, really 2007, of evaluating, do we want to, we need to get up and going on these policies again. This was the most cost-effective way to do that at the time. We've since spent the last 10 years, now 10 and a half, for the most part, having an actively working, functioning policy committee that has, to varying degrees, but I think in the last couple of years, pretty strong degree, done a lot of work. And so I'm not sure that and Radnor seems to be pretty particular about its policies, the quality of them, the nature of them, the consideration that we give, all sorts of things. The fact that we seek teacher input, student input, parent input, community input on the creation of some of our policies. It's my understanding not all school districts function that way. So I'm just not sure at the end of the day this is going to provide the service, because I think we ask a higher quality service of ourselves anyway, particularly the AR part. We are highly customized ARs in this township, at least based on the conversation we had 10 minutes ago about how we even go about crafting the ARs. I thought this was going to be helpful. I kind of thought it, and I initially thought that at least the merged policy service would, but I don't know which is going to cost us more, to merge 3 for $16.50 and then have to go back and redo the 20 that we've changed over the last 10 years for whatever reason. That one I can't answer.
Well, would it be helpful if we got some more information? For example, if
you don't have, for me, I have the information. You guys have presented it. This is just my opinion. That's my turn, and now everybody else should see how they feel. That's my thought.
We will. I just was going to offer you something else that might be helpful to any of us, which would be, is it possible, maybe Ed, in your experience, if, to Susan's point, if there are, which of the policies that we've updated have been updated as a result of changes to law, and so if this merge were to take place, we would not need to go back and do those policies necessarily again, because they were simply a tweak based on law, as opposed to ones that we felt needed to meet the needs of our district more specifically. Because, do you know what I'm saying?
But some of these, Amy, some of these are 5.5 years ago. That would mean, so for me, this is a cost-benefit analysis.
Right.
For the spending of $12,000, to some member of the public mentioned, are we going to now eliminate this job for somebody here? I don't see us eliminating an employee because all of a sudden we've got this particular work done. No, somebody in the public said, are we going to be replacing an employee for the cost of this?
Right.
For me, the $12,000 or so that this would cost, I'm doing a rough number there, to do all 3.
12,000, I'm just.
Is not, I added all 3. It's not going to, we're not going to eliminate an employee, so we're not going to save the money. We're just going to spend $12,000. In even the time that we would spend researching the 20 policies that go back as much as 5 or 6 or 7 years ago to see if the 3s, 4s, and 5s, what kind of changes we made. Were they just law? Were there other reasons? I just don't know that I don't know if it's worth it. That's all.
Yeah, I hear you. I just want to be clear, though, to make sure, because I am concerned that it could be misunderstood. This is not a $12,000 proposition in that you don't have to subscribe to any of these, and you can certainly subscribe to one of them. And frankly, I don't know if anybody from PSBA is watching, but $1,650 might be too expensive. You know, maybe there's a little negotiation that's available with PSBA. Just saying. But that would obviously not even be a factor if the committee doesn't feel it's worth pursuing at all. But I always feel like if somebody wants business, it's worth asking them if there's an opportunity to negotiate a little bit for that business. So just putting that out there, Dr. Bar Check, as a note you might want to make, given that Dr. Stevenson had to leave. But Dr. Babson, do you have any thoughts about, because we haven't really gone into these other two, but specifically the merged employee policy service, do you have any thoughts about the value potentially of that or not?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we weren't the kind of district that we are, and we just got boilerplate policies for those numbers, and we hadn't touched them and we didn't want to touch them, I would think that this would be a really useful service. But I think Susan hit on all the really important points there, which is that we're a district that likes to tailor to our own needs and interests. So it doesn't seem like a slam dunk. And then there are the organizational issues of what does something become after, and what's included and what isn't. As for the other, the middle one, seems useful, but I'm not, the information that I have here doesn't really make any clear case. And the final one is, I don't see really the need for it at all. I mean, there's no case made really. So it seems that the only one that could be useful could be the middle one. I would say that a big picture comment here would be that it'd be really interesting or useful to see an example, right? So here's a before and after example of here's what we do here, and here's the finished product or something like that. Some kind of to flesh out the cost benefit here, but it's not really a slam dunk given the info that we have here, I don't think.
One other thing, if I can, to add is that if you do the entire policy review service, let's say, I don't know how many policies are in the manual, but let's say it's 400. Each of those policies will need some level of customization, because what PSBA will do, as you may have seen in some of their models, is let's say someone at the district needs to do something. They'll give you options to say, is this the superintendent that does this? Is this the business manager? Is this the director of human resources? So someone's going to need to go through and select the Radnor-specific options that the board would like to see. The committee would then need to be prepared over a short period of time to adopt through 2 readings that number of policies. And if you leave them sit for more than a year or so, the only risk you run is that by the time you get around to, let's say PSBA gives you all 400 policies and says, here they are, and you decide internally, we can do 60 per year. By the time you get to numbers 340 to 600, a couple of years may have passed. That may not be a good policy anymore because it may very well be outdated. So whatever the committee chooses to do, just be prepared with the back-end work that the committee will do to get them ready for board approval.
So actually, that was going to be, let me ask you a question, because the only thing about policy review service that I could see being theoretically helpful, it came about in a question. I thought, okay, so say we proceed with the policy review service, where they're going to do, it looks to me like they're going to do a few sections at a time. It's going to take 1 to 2 years. So as a committee, what do? We say, okay, we're not going to meet for a few months because we're not going to meet for a year because it won't make sense to hire PSBA to do the policy review and then continue to work on policies that we're now paying them to review. So I don't know what the vision was in terms of procedurally, what would we have done? Just kind of said, okay, we're going to hold off meeting for 6 months till they review the first few sections of the policy, the policies, and then we go back over. And then let me just say that when the 2008 PSBA policies were adopted, there were a few, not many, but there were a few that they specifically omitted from the adoption. And there was a whole, you remember that big, long chart that I needed big glasses to read. You know, there had been some work to say, yes, we do want this one. No, we want to keep our original of that. I mean, there was work done in that regard. But so what's the vision of what this would even look like with regard to our work?
Well, can I just add something that was not in this description, which is something that I had seen, you know, I attended the school board PSBA annual school conference, and there were a number of sessions on policy there that I sat in on, and this is one of the things that came up as an option. There were a lot of school districts there, some of whom are really up to date with policy, some who are way behind in policy, and some people were asking, what is a policy? And everything in between. But one of the things in the description of what the Policy Review Service offers that did not make it onto this sheet was, just for extra information, is that during the policy review process, PSBA uses the PSBA policy guides as the foundation for the review and uses local resources such as the district's policies, website, handbooks, collective bargaining agreements, and budget statements to ensure consistency with local operations. Our philosophy is to use our policy guide as the foundation and to insert content from your local resources that, based on our analysis, is still compliant, still part of your district operation, and is not overly procedural. So I think one of the things that they offer to do is, and we found this before, where sometimes our handbooks, our student handbooks, aren't exactly aligned with the way our policies are written, and I think they go in and look at all of that. No?
That's not at all how I hear that. And
How do you hear it?
Ed, I want you to listen carefully, because what I hear that is that in that piece of the review where you said that they have to contact the district and say, for this policy, do we insert superintendent, business manager, HR person, that they would review all of that stuff in order to potentially figure out which word they're supposed to insert. I didn't hear that to say that they're going to go read all of our other manuals and see if they're aligned with our policies. And frankly, I'm not even sure, I can't even fathom how they can do even that level of work for $6,700. I can't fathom it.
I think they're going to give
Your mic.
My guess, and maybe it's worth a phone call to them, but my guess is what they're doing is giving you a template policy and then corresponding template language that could be inserted into your handbook that would match that policy. I don't think they're going to review the Radnor Middle School handbook and then compare it to the Radnor policy on student discipline and point out the differences. I think they're going to give you partner language that if you adopt this policy, this is language that you could put in your student handbook to ensure consistency. That would be my guess, but again, I'm not speaking with 100% certainty.
Patty, can I put you on the spot for 1 second? When we had our phone call,
Let's give Patty a microphone, though.
just so it's clarified, the way Ed explained it just now was the way I understood it from Davelin, from the PSBA, that they're going to give us a template that we get to insert certain language into the policy itself. But they're going to start with the boilerplate, and then we give them language that can be inserted. You don't recall it?
I thought she said they were going to look at all of our policies and all of our handbooks and various other things in the district.
So
I can't see how they can do that there's no way they can do that for
we'll get
6 to 7.
clarification.
But let me ask you a question, Ed. One other question. Do you have any districts that you know have utilized this service? And you don't have to call them out by name, but are you aware, do you work with districts that have utilized these services?
So of our clients, some have very engaged policy committees that actively meet on a regular basis that work with policy. You have other districts that commit less resources to policy Sometimes it's the smaller school districts or the school districts that just haven't quite prioritized policy review. In the school districts that are heavily invested in policy, I find that they rely less on the PSBA templates. When a school district either is far behind or is looking to bring an entire section perhaps up to speed, the PSBA policies are no doubt a good place to start, but they have to be tweaked. And I think PSBA would tell you that. I think school districts that just adopt their template policies, I don't think that's the intention. I think they would tell you that's not the intention, that every one requires a little bit of review. One additional thing is that like Radnor, many of our other clients have moved from a system of putting a lot of the, quote, guideline language into an administrative regulation. I think when PSBA does their policies, they retain a lot of the guidelines in the policy. So what this committee would have to do is either with Dr. Stevenson or Dr. Bar Check would be to instruct that in that review of the policy that you get from PSBA, some of that language would need to be extracted out to be put in an AR. Because I think when you get a PSBA document, their structure is to keep the majority of the guidelines in the policy. When they talk about administrative regulations, I've seen their proposed administrative regulations. They're mainly forms. They're not really regulations so much as they are forms. For example, in the English language development policy, the home language survey, which all school districts administer, is part of the AR for PSBA's English language development policy. That's not necessarily what I think this committee understands to be an administrative regulation. So you just have to make sure that everybody's talking the same language before you decide what you're doing, or once you commit to what you're doing, you need to know that you may have to move some of the language around once you get the finished product back from PSBA.
Mm-hmm. So I think it's safe to say that this is not a turnkey solution. In other words, that there's quite a bit of work that, I'm trying to get an idea of what work this takes off our plate or, our district's plate. And it just seems the more I hear about it, the more work that we're going to have to do. And it just doesn't seem like, we hand it over, they do everything, then they hand us back a finished product, i.e. there's still plenty of work that we have to do on our end. So, I'm still open-minded to it, but, have an open mind to it, but I'm just not clear that it's how much work it's taking off our plate.
I can give a personal, I sit on a school board that historically has not had a policy committee dedicated to reviewing policy. Mm-hmm. Manual was very outdated. Now there's a recognition that policy has to be prioritized. We're having discussions as to, do we use the PSBA models to at least get us up to speed, because what we don't have a strong foundation to begin with. Mm-hmm. Again, I think the PSBA models serve as a very good starting point, but as PSBA would tell you, they're not finished products. They need to be reviewed, they need to be customized, because they have to write a document that they can push out to all 500 of their school districts and say, this is kind of our recommendation. Mm-hmm. Every one needs to be reviewed locally for local procedure intricacies.
It's really helpful. Thanks.
Chuck, you said looking. Your mic's not on, but
There we go.
okay.
The 3, 4s, and 5s, I kind of begin to agree that if we're putting them together and then they're coming back and then we have to pull some of the stuff out, but then we also have ARs associated with them, and are the ARs different? And so then we have the whole AR piece where all of a sudden we have one policy for all employees, and we have ARs now for different levels of employees, okay? And if the only benefit is we can pull that one policy up and we can view it for everybody that works for us. Well, we know whether you're a teacher or whether you're an administrator or whether you're staff, so we could pull that particular numbers up. And as far as the standalone piece, then we wouldn't have to worry about that because there are policies, and they're in there. So originally, I thought it might be a good idea, but I'm kind of like, I actually don't think it is a good idea at this point now. I think part of it is the fact that we do take our policies seriously, and we do look at them, and we do have ARs that are very specific for them. The administrative regulation service, we talked about that as an option before. We may want to ask them and see what one looks like. Ed, his input was that they're not really, worthwhile to come back for them, and I would be in line with that. The policy review, I think that piece might be worth it. I like the idea that we have somebody else that's looking through comprehensive view and update for the compliance with the state laws, federal laws, rules, regulations. Also, I guess my question would be, we still do get alerts when there's a possible change. A change in the law needs to drive change in your policy. So do we get those now, correct?
Correct. So we have 3 different ways, as is stated in the one goal. It is through the solicitor's update, through the solicitor himself, and then we, as part of board docs and having our policies on board docs itself, there's something called PNN, Policy News Network, that we access, that they give updated, well, they're supposed to be bi-monthly newsletters. They're a little bit behind right now. The last one was August. We're waiting for the next one to come out. But yes, there are updates on there that we can go into and utilize that information to help drive what we're doing, our work.
But the PNN is not produced by board docs. PNN is not,
Correct.
the PNN updates that Tony is referring to come from PSBA.
Correct.
Not from board docs.
Right.
Okay.
But we still get them as well.
Yes.
Correct.
But they're a source of, yes.
We're
Yes.
notified, so we are notified with that. Many years ago, we were told that Radnor, if you were to look at it as a district, we're what would be called a fast second. Okay? So what I would be interested is in seeing somebody else that has done this, see how they feel about it. So I would be willing to hold off on this and get some concrete examples from other districts that have done it and whether it's been successful for them and what their experiences were, and then possibly move into that.
Okay, so Chuck is proposing that we get some firsthand references from, I think we can eliminate the administrative regulation service option. Nobody seems to, Ed sort of said that wouldn't be useful to us, right? But are you requesting for some firsthand references from districts who have
We might as well see
used
what
the merged employee policy service and the policy review service?
Yeah, that
Would
way
there be other people on the committee who would be in favor of tabling it until such thing can be acquired? Or is there consensus on this committee to not do anything and move on from this subject? Which way should we go with that?
I kind of want to suggest a totally different thing.
Okay.
We just passed a policy, 003.
Uh-huh.
Hopefully it's going to pass at the board and be a second read, and it's supposed to provide for some efficiency. So my assumption about why this came to us as a possibility is to, in some way, increase our efficiency for the administrators and for the district in how we go about keeping our policies up to date. By passing policy 003, we've given them an avenue to increase efficiency. So I would propose, let's put a pin in this for 6 months, and let's see what kind of work product we get through just the regular channel of 003, allowing Dr. Stevenson and Mr. Batchelor and whoever else is involved in kind of internal policy review and keeping us on track of keeping things up to date, and see how this is. That would be my thought. None of this is, I understand and appreciate the value of staying up to date. I think that we already have an avenue for that with the updates, particularly the ones that we get from Whistler Pearlstein, and I know that, they give Tony the monthly updates of any legal changes. We already had that as a goal this past year, and I wouldn't have personally seen any reason to change that. We should always be informed by federal law, which frankly PSBA is not going to be able to keep up with on a boilerplate level anyway. Well, maybe they do, but neither here nor there. Put a pin in it for 6 months and let's see how it works out with Dr. Stevenson taking over. I mean, it could have been Dr. Bar Check, except he's going to be working on his other projects that are so important, but neither here nor there. See if we have the efficiency that we're looking for with the utilization of 003. That would be my personal
Sounds like
thought.
an interesting proposition. What do you think about that, Mr. Madden?
I think that's a grand idea. One of the pieces I think that drove us to this is the policy conversion process, and I'd just like to thank Patty for for doing that and for handling that in-house, because that was a big job, and that was what really piqued our interest in doing this, because there was a long waiting list and everything else.
Right, that's true.
And you were the ones, and whomever else was with you, I don't know, but you got it done. So I would not be opposed to putting a pin in it for 6 months, and then we could look and see.
Board docs may be coming a call-in
Oh,
to
thank you very
Mrs.
much on our
Calderoni, because you don't, that's a best-kept secret. No one tell anyone how good Patty Calderoni is at
Geez, we're on
converting.
television.
Shh. So, but yes, thank you, that's for doing all of that. So let it be our, Dr. Bar Check, maybe you can circle back to Dr. Stevenson since he had to leave, and close the loop that we would like to put a pin in the PSBA policy service proposal for the next several months.
Have it noted and
Okay.
we'll talk with them.
Terrific. So that, because we have no public left, I assume there's no public comment, and.
Can I just
Yes, absolutely.
thank everybody for
Yes,
allowing
oh my
me to
God,
serve?
okay.
No, I'm
Yes.
just saying.
No,
For
no,
allowing
no.
me to serve
Hold
for the
on.
last year. I appreciate it. It actually lasted 3 years.
Yes.
So I really appreciate everyone's and the team effort and the approach that it took to get the work done. And I'm glad to see where the policy committee is at this point, and leave it off in good hands with Dr. Stevenson and the rest of the committee. So thank you.
And we want to
Thank
thank
you.
you, Dr. Bar Check, because you've been working hard this year, and your whole team with Molly and Patty and all those concerned did a lot of work this year. So it was nice. I think that was really evident in the recap of the goals for this year, that you've been doing a lot of work. So thank you. And everybody, we're adjourned. Have a nice evening.